Hey guys, welcome to the first week of our series called Big Questions. This is where we tackle the things that you guys are asking. So no matter how old we are, we never outgrow the need to ask questions, right? And the truth is, we just don't know all the answers. And most of us go to Google with our questions, right? Just think about the things that you've Googled. Questions like why you can't put a dog in the washing machine, or to wondering how old certain celebrities are, or to how to spell certain words, like I use that all the time, and to how to learn the hottest TikTok dance, which is like, I do that. Actually, I've never done that before. But here's the thing. We can't Google search every answer that we're looking for. Actually, I take that back. We can. We just may not always get a clear answer. And I once Googled, are blueberries good for you? And I got answers like 10 proven health benefits of blueberries. And then just to see, I Googled, are blueberries bad for you? And I got answers like the health risks of eating blueberries. No lie, that's totally true. So there's a random example, that's a random example, but you get my point, okay? We are wired to look for answers. In fact, I used to be known as the Google guy. While I was having a conversation with friends and we came across something that we didn't know in the conversation, I would grab my phone and I would look it up so that we knew exactly what we were talking about. I was the Google guy. And as we're wired for answers, the topics of our biggest questions are more intense than blueberries, though. We may wonder things like, why am I here? Who are my people? What am I supposed to do with my life? And hunting for answers to questions like this can get complicated. And that's why for the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time discussing some big questions. And the goal is that by the end of this series, we'll not only become more comfortable asking questions, but we'll also grow closer to other people who we can ask those questions with. So to start off, we're going to ask a somewhat churchy question. All right, maybe you've wondered this before, or maybe you haven't, and it's totally fine either way. But the question is, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Some people would say that our answer to that question changes everything about our lives. If that's true, then yes, this is a big question. However, if you watched 5 different TikToks or 5 different YouTube videos, you'd get 5 different answers for what that means. And when there are multiple possible answers to a question, it can be confusing. In fact, let's take a look at what TikTok suggests as the answer to that question.
If you give up your life for the glory of His, you will discover true life. In other terms, Jesus is inviting us into death to detach from ourselves, to fully take on and embrace His cross, and to fully yield to Him, to fully submit, fully surrender to Him. And only in this place will we find true life.
What does it mean to follow Jesus? 2 words, humility and submission. It means to humble ourselves before God and submit to His rule over our lives. It means to let God be the guiding force of our lives, not just our individual desire.
But my challenge for you today is this: that you would wake up, that you would open your eyes to the truth of the gospel, that truth would be what you live your entire life by.
Show me a video of what it means to be a follower of Christ. I'll go first.
So humbling yourself, denying yourself, beating up Satan, or just the need to wake up? My point is that a lot of people have different opinions about what it looks like to follow Jesus. And there are video after videos on TikTok of what it means to follow Jesus. But here's what's difficult about this. If we say the answer to the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus, could change everything for us, but then the answers we find online are just shallow, then why follow Jesus at all? In fact, we aren't even sure God really does much of anything for our lives other than making our social media bio look better or giving us something to do for a few hours on a weekend or on Wednesday nights. For a lot of people, Jesus just kind of lives off to the side of their real life, and every once in a while, He might cross their mind and they might think of Him. For some of you, that's maybe why you don't follow Jesus at all, because you don't really see how following would change much of anything for you. So then what's the point? In other words, if following Jesus doesn't seem to really do anything for your life, then it makes sense why you wouldn't want to follow. And I get it. See, people have been asking what it means to follow Jesus for a long time. And people are asking it now. And people were asking it thousands of years when Jesus actually showed up. And in the Gospels, the part of the Bible that tells us about Jesus' life, we're given an insider look at what following Jesus is all about. And this is in Matthew 4, verse 18 through 20. It says, one day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. And Jesus called out to them, come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets at once and followed him. So back in that time period, religious leaders, not Jesus, they had disciples. Disciples were people who followed the teachers or their leaders around to learn from them. And disciples kind of found their identity in being associated with a certain teacher because of what that teacher taught. And surely Peter and Andrew wondered what made Jesus different from other teachers. And they probably wondered things like, where would following this teacher take them? And how long would they be gone? And Jesus answered by basically saying, follow me and watch the way that I live my life, watch how I do things, and then go and do the same. And when you do that, you will know what will happen. Instead of being people who pull fish out of the water, you'll spend your time inviting humans to know God better and be who God has made them to be. I will bring out of you a new way of living and being in the world. So what Jesus offered was enough to inspire Andrew and Peter to go with him, to leave their nets. They left their fishing nets, they left their careers, their identities, and their community, and they followed Jesus. And a bunch of other women and men joined them as they went. And what I want us to really notice is that Jesus didn't have them first pass a Bible test or ask them if they were religious or ask around to find out who the good ones of their behavior was or how good their behavior was. He didn't tell them that they were going to be better than the other people. No. Jesus simply invited them to follow in his footsteps and do as Jesus did. Talk as Jesus talked, and love as Jesus loved. Jesus invited them to go where he went so that they could be more like him. And the thing is when they left their nets and their families and their way of doing life, they were probably filled with a ton of questions like, where are we going? Or how's this all going to turn out? Or for those of us who are familiar with the life of Jesus, it can be easy to forget that when Jesus started out, no one actually knew the story and how it would unfold. No one could have anticipated how it would have all gone down. So as far as they knew, Jesus was just another interesting religious teacher. Now, fast forward 3 years, throughout their time together, these disciples would see Jesus walk on water, heal the sick, and raise people from the dead. And they would hear him speak and watch him forgive sins. And they would see him arrested and sentenced to death without even putting up a fight. And finally, after 3 days of being dead and buried, they'd see him alive again. Things they never could have imagined. What's also crazy is what's following Jesus meant to the disciples after Jesus was gone. Because Peter eventually becomes the first leader of the church. And except for John, every one of Jesus' closest disciples died defending their love and faith in Jesus and what he represented. Also, thousands of years later, we're still looking at their stories, learning from them, and even naming children after these disciples. So when Jesus asked them to follow, they had no idea what they would do and who they would become. But God knew. God had a life in mind for them that was bigger than the life that they were currently living. And Jesus had more in mind for who they'd become and more in mind for their relationships that they would have. He had more in mind for how much they would matter in the world. Their biggest life questions found answers bigger and better than they would have ever dreamed of from just their boats. And you could say it this way. Jesus had more in mind for their lives in the areas that mattered most. And in the same way, Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. If we had asked Andrew and Peter and the other disciples, what does it mean to follow Jesus? At the beginning, they wouldn't have known, but they knew enough to take one step at a time. They knew they didn't have to have everything figured out on day one. They just had to commit one day at a time, one step at a time, to follow Jesus and his example. And in doing that, they began to live out what following Jesus meant. As a result, they found more purpose and direction. They found better relationships. They had more joy and peace. They found something worth giving their lives to. They found answers to what they were looking for, and we can too. So think of it this way. When you really understand who Jesus is, it changes everything. Following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions, because if Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most, then following him will lead to clarity in those areas. For the disciples, following Jesus was an adventure that changed who they were and who they became. Jesus changed their lives in the best way possible. Sure, he taught them so many things about life and even more about behavior, but more than that, Jesus loved them and served them. To them, following Jesus wasn't about religion and a bunch of rules. It wasn't about social media aesthetic or about following second-hand information from other people who claim to know Jesus. To them, following Jesus was personal. It was a personal experience, a life-changing encounter with Jesus himself. It was a journey that led them to richer, to deeper, to more fully human lives than they ever could have imagined. But what about us? We can't be physically present with Jesus like they were. So what can we do? Whether you are already following Jesus or are just thinking about it, here are a few things that I think that we can do to get started. Number one, start reimagining what following Jesus looks like. Consider asking yourself a few things. Has my view of following Jesus become too small? Have I reduced it to a bunch of rules or list of do's and don'ts? What if it's bigger than that? What if it's an adventure? What if it's life-changing? What if it's the friendship that I've always wanted? Reimagine it. Write it down. Draw it out. Visualize it in a new way. And number two, take a step. Follow the example of Andrew and Peter. They simply took a step to follow Jesus. They left their nets. They didn't know what would have happened with their lives. They just trusted Jesus enough to take one next step. So what would a step look like for you? Don't overwhelm yourself with all the steps to take to get 3 or 4 years down the road. Start with just one single thing, one single step. And maybe you start by being honest with God and open about some questions that you have. Maybe it would mean having a conversation with your life group leader or another adult that you trust about what's going on in your life. Maybe it's showing up here consistently or engaging with your life group more consistently. Maybe it would cost you something, but maybe it would be worth it. Identify your next step and then be bold enough to take it. And then number 3, think about these 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? And can I make a difference? And over the next few weeks, we're going to look at and dig into these questions. Following Jesus can help us as we learn to answer these questions. Jesus isn't just a separate category in our lives. He's part of figuring this stuff out for us. Invite Jesus into the process. See what Jesus has to say about the biggest questions that you have about yourself. You may be surprised by what you discover. So spend some time thinking about those questions. Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. Imagine if we could really understand this fully. What if we could see that following Jesus is life-changing? What if we quit seeing it as a list of religious rules and start seeing it as bigger than that? And what if we trusted that following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions? We have no idea where that journey will take us, but neither did Andrew and Peter, and it took them places beyond what they could imagine. So let me pray for you as we kind of go into this and as you think about, hey, what is that first step that I need to take? So Father, I just thank you so much for these students. I just pray that as they are watching, as they are thinking about that first step that they can take to really just step out more towards Jesus, whether they've been following him for a while or whether they don't even know him at all. God, I just pray that they just know what that next step is that they need to take. And I pray that they take it. Sometimes the hardest step is the first one, and I just pray that they can just step into the unknown and just trust you with it. We love you, Jesus, and thank you, and pray this in your name. Amen. Thanks, guys, for watching first week. We are going to be in week 2 next week. We'll see you then. Bye.